Little girl grabbed a stranger's hand to avoid her cruel aunt, not knowing he was a millionaire CEO. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin with today's story. It was a cold afternoon in the heart of the city, and the busy streets were filled with the usual hustle and bustle. People rushed by, their faces lost in their own worlds, as they headed to their destinations. But amidst the crowd, there was a small figure standing alone, shivering in the cold. A little girl, no older than 7, clutched the edge of a building as if trying to steady herself against the chill. Her clothes were worn and frayed, not at all suitable for the winter air. Her shoes were too small, and her hair, once neat, was now tangled from the wind. She stood there, frozen, her eyes darting nervously as if waiting for something, or someone. Then, out of nowhere, she saw him. A man, tall and well-dressed, walking briskly down the sidewalk. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement, his expensive suit catching the eye of passers-by. He seemed to be just another successful businessman in a city full of them. But the little girl didn't see the millionaire CEO in front of her. All she saw was a lifeline, a chance for escape. Without thinking, she reached out and grabbed his hand. She pulled at it desperately, her small fingers trembling. "Please, don't let them take me," she whispered, her voice barely audible against the sound of the busy street. The man stopped in his tracks, surprised by the sudden contact. He looked down at her, confused. She was just a child, so small and fragile. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him pause. She looked terrified, like she had been running from something far worse than the cold. For a moment, he hesitated. Who was she? Why was she so frightened? And why had she grabbed his hand, as if he were the only one who could protect her? He had no answers, but one thing was clear. She needed help. The man crouched down to her level, trying to reassure her. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she took a small step back, still clutching his hand. "Please, don't let her take me back," she begged, her words a plea for mercy. The man's heart tightened. Who was she talking about? Who was this woman she feared so much? Before he could ask, a voice called out from behind them. "Mia, where are you going?" The voice was sharp, filled with authority. The little girl's face paled as she looked over her shoulder. A woman, tall and menacing, was approaching them quickly, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. It was clear from the way the woman walked, almost like a predator, that she was not someone to be crossed. The little girl recoiled, pulling away from the man's grasp, but the man held firm. He knew he couldn't let her go back to that woman, whoever she was. He turned to face the woman, his expression calm but firm. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being in control. The woman stopped in her tracks, glaring at him. She sized him up, taking in his expensive suit and confident posture. For a moment, there was a tense silence. The man could almost feel the woman's eyes calculating, weighing her options. But then, with a sharp, dismissive motion, she sneered. "This is none of your business, sir. She's just a troublesome child who doesn't know her place." The little girl flinched at the woman's words, as if they were a slap across the face. The man's heart sank. It was clear this was no ordinary argument. This was something far darker. He turned to the little girl, crouching down once more to her level. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice full of resolve. "You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you." The little girl's eyes widened, a spark of hope flickering in them for the first time since he'd met her. She slowly nodded, though the fear still clung to her like a shadow. The man stood up, pulling out his phone. He knew he couldn't let this go. He wouldn't let this go. As the woman approached again, her face contorted in anger, the man stepped in front of the little girl, blocking her from view. "I'm calling the police," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The woman's face went pale. She wasn't expecting resistance, not from someone like him. But it was too late. The man had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to let the little girl be taken away, not by someone like that woman. Not by anyone. As the man stood firm, blocking the woman's path, he felt a surge of protectiveness for the little girl standing behind him. Her small form trembled, her eyes wide with fear, yet there was a glimmer of hope in them now, something that had been absent moments ago. The woman, still glaring at him, finally spoke. "You really think you can protect her? She's just a burden." Her voice dripped with disdain. The man remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He could see the pain in the little girl's eyes, the raw emotion that betrayed her fear of going back to that woman. "I won't let you take her," he said, his voice steady, his words final. The woman's lips curled into a cruel smile, but she didn't press further. Instead, she turned and walked away, muttering under her breath. The man didn't trust her retreat. He immediately turned to the little girl. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, crouching down at her level once more. The girl nodded, her small hands clutching the edges of her worn coat as if it were a shield. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, looking down at the ground before she spoke. "Mia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mia," he repeated, as if trying to comfort her with the sound of her own name. "I'm going to take you somewhere safe. You're not going back to her." Mia looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. But where will I go?" she asked, her voice shaky. The man paused, feeling the weight of her question. "You'll stay with me. I'll make sure you're safe," he said, his voice soft but full of resolve. Mia didn't respond immediately, but the fear in her eyes seemed to soften just a little. She didn't know who this man was, but something about him felt different. He wasn't like the others who had come and gone in her life. He seemed genuine. The man stood and extended his hand to her once again. This time, Mia took it without hesitation, her small fingers gripping his tightly, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to this world. They walked together to his car, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mia felt a sense of security. The man, though a stranger, felt like her protector. He opened the door to the car and helped her inside, gently making sure she was settled. As he closed the door behind her, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. He couldn't turn back now. Mia had already suffered so much, and he wouldn't let her face that cruel woman again. The drive to his home was quiet, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The hum of the car's engine and the soft whispers of the wind outside filled the space between them, but they didn't need words. As they neared his house, Mia looked out the window, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. It wasn't much, just a quiet neighborhood, with rows of neat houses and leafless trees lining the streets. But it was different from the chaos she had left behind. "We're almost there," the man said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She nodded, but didn't speak. He could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her eyelids drooped as if sleep had become a distant memory. He reached the driveway and parked the car, his mind already racing with the next steps. But for now, the most important thing was getting her settled. He opened the car door and stepped out, walking around to her side to help her out. Mia slowly climbed out of the car, still holding his hand tightly as they walked into his house. It was a simple place, but warm, with soft lighting that gave the whole room a welcoming feel. He led her to the living room, where a comfortable sofa awaited. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, still clutching her coat as if it were her last line of defense. He left her there for a moment, going to the kitchen to prepare something warm for her to eat. When he returned, he found her looking around, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "This is your new home, for now," he said gently, setting the food down in front of her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Mia looked at the food, her stomach growling in response. She hadn't eaten much that day, too focused on escaping the nightmare that was her life. She picked up the spoon and hesitated for a moment before she took a bite. As the warmth of the food spread through her, she felt something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she was finally safe. As the days went by, Mia began to feel more at ease in the man's home. It wasn't a palace by any means, but it was warm and safe, two things she hadn't known in a long time. The man, whose name she had learned was Ethan, had been kind to her in ways she had never experienced before. He made sure she ate well, got enough rest, and had everything she needed. But there was something about him that still made her nervous. He wasn't like the people she was used to. There was no cruelty in his eyes, no harsh words. just kindness and a calm that made her feel different. Mia had spent so many years running from one dangerous place to another, always looking over her shoulder, never knowing when the next blow would come. But with Ethan, she didn't feel the need to be on guard. One evening, after dinner, Mia was sitting on the couch in the living room, staring out of the window at the snow gently falling outside. Ethan was busy in the kitchen, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply relax. It felt good to be able to think without fear, without that constant knot in her stomach. But as the silence grew, the thoughts she had been trying to suppress began to surface. She couldn't help but wonder, how long would this last? How long before she was taken away again? Just then, Ethan walked into the room, holding a cup of hot chocolate. He handed it to her, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Are you okay?" he asked. Softly, Mia nodded, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words that were weighing heavily on her heart. She didn't want to admit that the fear was still there, lingering, that she didn't fully trust that this new life would last. Ethan seemed to sense her unease. He sat down beside her on the couch, placing the cup in her hands. "Mia," he said gently, "you don't have to be afraid anymore. You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you." His words were soothing, and Mia wanted to believe him. But the scars of her past were not so easily erased. She glanced down at the cup in her hands, the steam rising gently, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the urge to speak her truth. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just sat there, his presence comforting, allowing her the space to say what she needed to. Finally, Mia spoke again, her voice a little stronger this time. What if I have to leave again? What if she comes back for me?" Ethan's expression softened, his gaze never leaving her. He reached over and gently took her hand. "Mia," he said firmly, "I'm not going to let that happen. I promise you. You're not going back to her." Mia's eyes welled up with tears, the words she had longed to hear finally sinking in. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future that was different from her past. She squeezed Ethan's hand, her grip tight with the vulnerability she felt. "But how can I trust that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan smiled gently, his thumb brushing over her hand in a reassuring motion. "Because I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, Mia. You're not alone anymore." Mia stared at him for a long moment, taking in the sincerity in his eyes. The walls she had built around herself, the ones that had kept her safe for so long, began to crack. She wanted to believe him, to trust that she could finally have a life free from fear. But it was still hard to let go of the doubt that had plagued her for so long. Ethan stood up then, his expression soft but resolute. "Why don't we go? Get some rest? Tomorrow is a new day, and it's yours. You get to decide what happens next." Mia nodded slowly, unsure, but willing to take the first step. As she followed him to the guest room, she glanced back at the warm light of the living room. It felt like a new chapter, but she knew it would take time to heal. At the mention of food, reminding her how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal, she sat down across from Ethan, her hands still a little nervous as she picked up a fork. The food tasted amazing, fluffy pancakes, crispy bacon, and fresh fruit. It was the first real meal she'd had in a long time, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like she could relax. As they ate, Ethan broke the silence. "I'm glad you're here, Mia," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I know it's not easy to trust people after what you've been through, but I want you to know that you don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Mia looked up at him, meeting his eyes. She wanted to believe him, but it was hard. It was hard to believe that someone would truly protect her after everything she had been through. "I don't know how to trust," she admitted quietly, pushing the food around on her plate. "I don't know if I can." Ethan's expression softened. He reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. "You don't have to trust me all at once. But know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to keep you safe." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that Mia hadn't heard in a long time. Slowly, she nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe in safety again. After breakfast, Ethan got up from the table and went to the door. "I have some errands to run, but I'll be back soon. You're welcome to stay here and relax, or if you want to go out, let me know. I can drive you wherever you need to go." Mia stood up too, feeling a little unsure. She wasn't used to having choices, to having someone offer her freedom without fear of what might happen next. "I'll stay here," she said softly, looking down at the floor. Ethan smiled, nodding. "All right, I'll be back in a couple of hours. Just take it easy, okay?" Mia watched as he left, the door closing behind him with a soft click. As the house grew quiet, she felt the weight of the silence settle in. But it wasn't the oppressive silence she was used to. It was different, peaceful. Mia walked over to the window and looked outside. The world was calm, still covered in the remnants of the snowstorm from the night before. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel the urge to run. She didn't feel the need to look over her shoulder. She felt like she could breathe. And that was the first step. She was safe. And maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe that life could be different now. Mia woke up to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the curtains. The peaceful silence of the house wrapped around her, a stark contrast to the chaotic life she had known before. It had been a few days since she arrived at Ethan's home, and though there was still a part of her that couldn't shake off the fear of what had happened before, something was slowly changing inside her. She wasn't sure what to call it yet, but it was as if the tension in her body had lessened, even if just a little. Today, Ethan had asked her to go with him to the park, a simple outing that felt almost too normal. But to Mia, it was a big step. It was an invitation to begin living again, to leave the weight of her past behind, at least for a while. As she stood by the window, staring out at the quiet neighborhood, she thought about how different things were now. She remembered the days when she was afraid to step outside, when every movement she made was driven by the fear of being caught, of being forced back into a life that felt like a prison. She had lived that way for so long that it had become second nature to her. But here, with Ethan, it was different. She was allowed to make choices, even small ones. It felt strange, but good. Mia finished getting ready and walked downstairs, where she found Ethan already waiting by the door. He smiled when he saw her, a smile that seemed genuine, warm. "Ready for a walk?" he asked, his voice light, but with an underlying tenderness that Mia wasn't used to. She nodded, though she felt a little unsure. "I've never really done something like this before," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Ethan's smile softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said gently. "We'll take it slow. You don't have to rush anything. We're just going for a walk." Mia wasn't sure why, but the simple reassurance from him made her feel a little less anxious. They walked out the door and into the bright sunlight, the cool morning air brushing against their faces. As they made their way to the park, Mia couldn't help but notice how peaceful everything seemed. The trees were just beginning to bud with the arrival of spring, and the streets were quiet, the hustle and bustle of the city miles away from here. The park was empty except for a few families scattered here and there, enjoying the calm morning. Ethan led the way to a bench by a small pond, and they sat down together. Mia was surprised to find that she was enjoying the stillness, the peace that surrounded them. She had forgotten what it was like to just sit and breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. As they sat there in silence, Mia finally spoke. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure of what she meant. "Do what?" he asked. "How do you just trust people?" Mia's question was simple, but it cut through the quiet. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "It's not always easy," he admitted. "But you learn to trust yourself first. Once you do that, it's easier to trust others." Mia listened carefully, her mind turning over his words. Trusting herself? That was something she hadn't done in a long time. She had spent so many years living in fear, relying on others who only used her, took advantage of her. But with Ethan, it felt different. She had begun to trust him, even if it was just a little. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe she could learn to trust again. Maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. "I don't know if I'm ready for that yet," Mia said quietly, almost to herself. "But maybe I can try." Ethan smiled at her, his expression gentle. "That's all anyone can ask for. Just take it one step at a time." They sat there for a while longer, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the peace of the park. For the first time in a long time, Mia felt like she could breathe. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for now, in this moment, she was safe. And that was enough. Mia had spent the last few days adjusting to the peaceful life Ethan had provided her, but deep down, the fear still lingered. It wasn't fear of Ethan or his intentions. It was the fear of the past, of what she had left behind, and what might come for her. The memories of her aunt's cruel treatment still haunted her, but she was trying to push them aside. Every moment here felt like a gift, but the question always crept back. How long would it last? Ethan had told her repeatedly that she was safe, but Mia wasn't used to feeling safe. She had always lived in constant survival mode, never knowing when she would have to run again. She had no idea how to stop living that way, but she was trying. One afternoon, Mia was sitting on the couch, the soft hum of the house filling the silence, when Ethan came into the room. He looked at her with a soft expression, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel uneasy. "Mia," he said, sitting down next to her. "I think it's time we talk about your future." Mia tensed, unsure of where this conversation was going. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Ethan took a deep breath. "I know you've been through a lot, and I want to make sure you have everything you need to start over. We can figure out what comes next, together. But first, I think it's important that you start trusting again. Trusting yourself, and trusting that people around you want to help." Mia's heart raced. Trusting herself? That was something she hadn't done in a long time. She had learned to rely on others to survive, but trusting them? That was a different story. Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to do it all at once," he said gently. "But little by little, you can start rebuilding. You've been strong for so long, Mia. You've survived everything that's been thrown at you. But now, it's time to allow yourself to heal." Mia was silent, her mind whirling. She didn't know if she could. Healing felt like a distant dream, something other people did, not someone like her. She had been taught to fend for herself, to trust no one but herself. It felt almost impossible to consider that she could let her guard down. Ethan seemed to understand the storm raging inside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering the quiet reassurance that she had come to rely on. "I know it's hard," he said softly, "but it's not something you have to do alone. I'm here. I've got your back, and we'll take it one step at a time." His words were gentle, but they carried a weight that Mia couldn't ignore. She looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe she could try. Maybe she could learn to trust again, even just a little. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll try." Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that made Mia feel, for the first time, like she wasn't alone. "That's all I'm asking," he said. "And when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next together." Mia nodded, though the uncertainty still lingered. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she could face it. For the first time, she felt like she had a future to look forward to. The days passed, and though Mia still had moments of doubt, she took small steps forward. She started trusting Ethan more, relying on him for support. Each day, she grew a little stronger, a little more confident. The fear that had once gripped her tightly began to loosen, slowly replaced with hope. The life she had imagined for herself felt far away, but now, it didn't seem as impossible. She was beginning to believe that maybe she could heal, that maybe there was a chance for her to build something better, something beyond the pain she had lived with for so long. Mia had started to feel like she was finally beginning to settle into this new life with Ethan. The peace she had been yearning for was slowly becoming a part of her reality. The fear of her past, the memories of her aunt's cruelty, still lingered in the corners of her mind, but each day that passed, she felt the weight of those memories lighten just a little. It wasn't easy, but she was starting to trust again. Trusting Ethan was still a work in progress, but she had begun to let down her guard, bit by bit. One afternoon, while Mia was sitting in the living room, reading a book Ethan had given her, the doorbell rang. She glanced at the clock. It was unusual for Ethan to have visitors this late in the day. He had told her he would be working late at the office. Hesitantly, she stood up and walked to the door, her heart racing with an unease she couldn't quite shake. Who could it be? When she opened the door, she was taken aback to see a woman standing there, her face partially hidden behind a large hat. She looked familiar, but Mia couldn't place her right away. The woman smiled kindly, but there was something about her smile that made Mia's stomach churn. "Hello, dear. Is Ethan home?" The woman's voice was soft, yet it had an almost eerie calm to it. Mia's mind raced as she searched her memory. The woman didn't seem threatening, but there was something unsettling about her presence. She hesitated, trying to read the woman's expression. "Ethan isn't home right now," Mia finally replied, her voice uncertain. The woman raised an eyebrow, and then her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I see. Well, would you mind letting him know I stopped by? Tell him it's important," the woman said, her tone polite but insistent. "I'm sorry, but I don't know when he'll be back," Mia said, taking a small step back. Something wasn't right. The woman's gaze seemed to linger on her, as if sizing her up. "Is everything all right?" Mia asked, her voice betraying a hint of anxiety. The woman's smile returned, but it was colder now, like a mask. "Yes, everything is fine. I'm just a friend of his," she said, then added with a hint of sharpness. "It's nothing for you to worry about." Mia didn't like the way the woman spoke. There was something about the way she said it that made her uncomfortable, like the woman was hiding something. Mia nodded quickly, her instinct telling her to keep the door slightly ajar, just in case. "I'll tell him you stopped by," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman nodded, still smiling, and then turned and walked away down the path. Mia closed the door quickly, locking it behind her. Her heart was still racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had that woman come here? And why did she seem so insistent on seeing Ethan? Mia pushed the thought aside for the moment, but the unease stayed with her. She tried to distract herself by going back to her book, but her mind kept drifting back to the mysterious woman. A few hours later, Ethan returned home, just as Mia was preparing dinner in the kitchen. He greeted her with a smile, but Mia could sense a subtle shift in his demeanor, like he was preoccupied. "Hey, how was your day?" Mia asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "It was fine, just busy," he said, shrugging off his jacket and hanging it up. Mia hesitated, then decided to ask. "Someone came by while you were out," she said carefully. Ethan stopped and looked at her, his expression hardening slightly. "Who was it?" he asked, his tone more serious now. "A woman," Mia replied, trying to recall the details. "She said she was a friend of yours. She wanted to talk to you." Ethan's face tightened, but he quickly masked it with a neutral expression. "What did she want?" he asked, his voice low. "She didn't say. She just asked me to let you know she stopped by," Mia replied, watching him closely. Ethan seemed to be processing this information, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "Was there anything else?" Mia asked. Ethan paused for a moment, then shook his head. "No, nothing else. I'll handle it," he said, his voice firm. But there was something in his eyes, something Mia couldn't quite place. For a moment, he seemed distant, like he was thinking about something else. The feeling in Mia's chest grew heavier. Something about the woman's visit and Ethan's reaction didn't sit right with her. She wanted to ask more, to press him for answers, but she knew now wasn't the time. Ethan would tell her when he was ready. For now, all she could do was wait. But as she watched him, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would shake the fragile peace they had built. Mia knew that, sooner or later, her past would catch up with her. She just didn't know how, or when. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ever since the woman had visited, things had felt off. Ethan's reactions were too quick, too guarded, as if he was hiding something. Mia had learned to read people's expressions, their tone, from years of living in fear. She could tell when something wasn't being said, when the silence between words spoke louder than the words themselves. She tried to push the thought aside, but it clung to her, growing stronger with each passing hour. The unease gnawed at her. She didn't know why Ethan wasn't telling her the full story, but she could sense that there was more to it than he was letting on. After dinner that night, Ethan had gone into his study, his usual retreat when he needed to focus on work. Mia, sitting in the living room, stared at the book in front of her, her mind unable to concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the mysterious woman. Who was she? What did she want with Ethan? The door to the study opened, and Ethan stepped out, his face set in a way that made Mia's heart skip a beat. He was carrying his coat, his expression unreadable. "I'm going out," he said, his voice calm. But there was something about it that felt like a warning. "Where are you going?" Mia asked before she could stop herself. Ethan paused, his gaze flickering over to her. "I need to handle something. I'll be back soon," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mia's stomach twisted. There was a finality in his words, as if he was saying goodbye without actually saying it. "Ethan," she started, her voice trembling slightly. but he was already out the door before she could finish. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, feeling a coldness settle in her chest. She had trusted him, and he had been kind, but something in her gut told her that this wasn't over. She wasn't sure what Ethan was involved in, but she felt a deep sense of dread. She knew that the life she had left behind wasn't just going to stay in the past. The door clicked shut, and Mia stood there, caught between the need to trust and the instinct to protect herself. The silence in the house felt louder now, more oppressive. She walked to the window and looked out into the night, her eyes scanning the street below. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the wind rustled the leaves of the trees. Nothing seemed out of place, but Mia's heart raced as if something was about to happen. She couldn't sit here waiting, couldn't keep wondering about what was really going on. She had to find out. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and headed for the door. She wasn't sure what she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't just let this moment pass. She had to know the truth. The cold night air hit her as she stepped outside, the chill biting at her skin. She pulled her coat tighter around her and made her way down the quiet street. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty streets, but she kept walking, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of Ethan. As she walked, she couldn't help but remember the promise he had made to her, that she was safe, that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. But that promise seemed distant now, overshadowed by the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Mia's footsteps quickened, and she found herself walking toward the park where they had been earlier. It was empty, the benches and trees bathed in the dim light of the street lamps. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what she was looking for. Then she heard a noise, a voice, low and unfamiliar. She froze, her heart racing. Slowly, she moved closer, trying to make out the words. It was hard to hear, but she could make out a few phrases, something about a deal, and something about keeping quiet. Then, she heard Ethan's voice. He was speaking calmly, but there was an edge to his tone that made her stomach drop. "This needs to stay between us," Ethan said. "No one else can know about this." Mia's heart pounded in her chest. She had to know what was going on. She stepped closer, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. But just as she took another step forward, a twig snapped under her foot, loud in the stillness of the night. The voices stopped, and she froze, praying they hadn't heard her. A moment of silence stretched before Ethan's voice rang out again, much closer now. "Mia?" He knew she was there. Mia's heart sank, and she stepped out from the shadows, her breath shallow. Ethan's eyes met hers, and there was something in his expression, guilt, regret, and something else she couldn't quite place. "What are you doing here?" he asked softly, his voice now laced with concern. Mia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, her mind racing. "What's going on, Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I didn't want you to know," he said finally, his voice low. "But I'm involved in something. Something that might put you in danger if it gets out." Mia's stomach twisted. She had known something wasn't right. "What kind of danger?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her, his face hardening. "I'll protect you, but you need to trust me, and you need to stay away from this. For your own safety." Mia stood there, her mind spinning. The truth was out, and it was more complicated than she had ever imagined. She had trusted Ethan, but now she didn't know where that trust would lead. She had come so far in her journey to heal, but it seemed like her past, and Ethan's, were about to collide in ways neither of them could control. Mia's heart was racing as she stood there, facing Ethan, the man she had begun to trust. His words, though calm, echoed in her mind with a sense of urgency that she couldn't ignore. "I'll protect you, but you need to trust me, and you need to stay away from this. For your own safety." His words were meant to reassure her, but instead, they only deepened the sense of confusion and fear that had settled in her chest. For the first time since she'd come into his life, Mia wasn't sure who Ethan really was. She had trusted him, believed that he had been the one person who could give her the stability she desperately needed. But now, as the reality of the situation began to unfold, she realized that the world she had started to build was far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. "What are you involved in?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated. For a moment, his gaze darkening as he looked away from her. "It's complicated," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't want you to get involved in any of this. It's not safe for you." Mia felt the walls she had so carefully built begin to crack. She didn't know what to believe anymore. "I deserve to know," she said, her voice firm, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Ethan turned his gaze back to her, his face hard with the weight of whatever secret he was holding. "I'm involved in a business arrangement that's dangerous," he admitted, his voice tight. "There are people I've crossed, people who won't hesitate to hurt anyone close to me. And that includes you." Mia's breath caught in her throat. The fear that had been lurking just below the surface finally broke through, and she stepped back instinctively, as if she could somehow distance herself from the danger that now surrounded them. "But I thought you were different," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I thought you wanted to protect me." Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I do," he said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "I never wanted this to happen. But the reality is, Mia, you're in danger just by being here. And I can't let anything happen to you." Mia felt her stomach twist. The man who had promised her safety was now the same man who was dragging her into a world she had never wanted to be a part of. She wanted to run, to escape this nightmare before it was too late. But something kept her rooted in place, as if her legs were frozen by the weight of the truth that was crashing down on her. She had spent so long trying to find a way out of her past, only to realize that her present was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan's gaze softened, but there was no easy answer in his eyes. "We stay careful," he said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "I'll keep you safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." Mia swallowed hard, the tears threatening to spill as the weight of his words sank in. She didn't know if she could believe him anymore, didn't know if she could trust him to keep his promises. The world around her had shifted, and nothing felt certain anymore. But one thing was clear, she couldn't face it alone. "I'm scared," Mia admitted, her voice barely audible. Ethan took a step toward her, his eyes softening with sympathy. "I know," he said gently, "but you're not alone. I'm here. We'll figure this out, together." The words were comforting, but they didn't ease the knot in her stomach. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he would keep her safe, but the fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. As she stood there, facing the man who had become both her protector and her source of fear, Mia realized that she was caught between two worlds, the life she had tried so desperately to leave behind, and the life she had hoped to build with him. And she didn't know which one would ultimately destroy her. Ethan reached out, his hand gently brushing hers, grounding her in the moment. "I promise you, Mia," he said softly, "I won't let anything happen to you. We'll get through this, together." Mia didn't know if she could believe him, but in that moment, she wanted to. She didn't want to be alone again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could face whatever was coming together. Mia sat in the living room, her eyes scanning the room as the weight of the conversation she'd had with Ethan lingered in the air. The promise he made to protect her echoed in her mind, but the doubt that had been slowly creeping in was now louder than ever. She didn't know if she could trust him completely anymore. Ethan had told her that he would keep her safe, that nothing would hurt her, but she couldn't help but feel like there were pieces of the puzzle that were still missing. As much as she wanted to believe him, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on, something Ethan wasn't telling her. The more she thought about the woman's visit and the cryptic conversation she'd overheard, the more questions she had. What was Ethan involved in? Who were these people that could put her in danger? And why hadn't he told her the truth from the beginning? Her thoughts were interrupted when the door opened, and Ethan stepped inside. He looked at her, his expression calm, but Mia could sense the tension beneath it. He had been gone for hours, and she knew he had been dealing with something important, something that concerned her. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "You okay?" Mia didn't respond immediately. She just watched him, trying to gauge the truth in his eyes. "Where did you go?" she asked finally, her voice soft but firm. Ethan paused, his face unreadable. He seemed to hesitate for a moment before responding. "I had to meet with someone," he said, his tone neutral. "It's nothing you need to worry about." Mia's stomach twisted at his words. The way he said it, so casually, almost dismissively, made her heart race. She wanted to believe that everything was fine, but the gnawing doubt wouldn't let her. "Who were you meeting with?" she pressed. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. I told you, it's not something you need to be involved with, he said, his voice sharp now. Please, Mia, just trust me. But Mia could feel the walls closing in. The more he tried to distance her from the truth, the more her suspicions grew. I can't just sit here and pretend like everything's fine, she said, standing up, her voice trembling with emotion. I deserve to know what's going on. You promised me that I would be safe, but I don't feel safe. Not anymore. Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment, it seemed like he wanted to say something more, something that would reassure her. But instead, he just stood there, silent. Mia could see the conflict in his eyes, the guilt, the regret, the burden of whatever secret he was holding. I don't want you to get hurt, Mia, he said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. I didn't want to drag you into this. But Mia couldn't ignore the fear that had settled deep in her chest. She had been through too much to ignore the signs. She had learned to trust her instincts, and they were telling her that something was wrong. I'm not some fragile little girl, Ethan, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I've survived far worse than whatever this is. If you're involved in something dangerous, I deserve to know. I'm not going to live in the dark anymore. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and then, with a heavy sigh, he finally spoke. There are people I owe money to. People who don't take kindly to broken promises. I've been trying to fix this on my own, but it's bigger than I thought. And now, I'm putting you in danger by keeping you here. Mia's heart sank. This wasn't just some small misunderstanding. This was bigger than she could have ever imagined. I don't want to be a part of this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to live a normal life. I thought that maybe with you, I could. Ethan's face crumpled with emotion, and he took a step closer to her, but Mia took a step back, her eyes not leaving his. I know, Mia, he said softly, his voice full of regret. I never wanted to bring this into your life. But I don't know how to get out of it without putting you in even more danger. Mia felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let herself break down. So what now? She asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and he ran his hand through his hair again, clearly struggling with the weight of his choices. We have to get out of here, he said finally, his voice resolute. I'll get you somewhere safe. I'll fix this. I promise. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know if she could believe him, but in that moment, she realized that the only thing she could do was take that first step forward, whatever that meant. Where will we go? She asked, her voice shaking. Ethan looked at her with a mix of determination and fear. I don't know yet, he admitted. But we're getting out of here. Together. Mia took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of hope amid the uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming next, but for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Mia couldn't sleep. The night seemed longer than ever, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. Ethan had promised they would leave, that he would take her somewhere safe, but something in her gut told her the road ahead wasn't going to be as simple as he made it sound. The truth, as painful as it was, had been laid bare. Ethan's life was entangled in something dangerous, something far beyond what Mia had ever imagined. She had wanted safety, stability, a chance to heal from the years of fear and pain. Now, everything felt uncertain again. The morning light began to creep through the blinds, the soft glow casting shadows across the room. Ethan was still sleeping on the couch in the living room. Mia had insisted on taking the bed, though she wasn't sure why. It wasn't as if she would be able to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound from the outside world felt magnified, as if she were waiting for something to break through the silence. Mia stood up from the bed, walking over to the window and looking outside. The world seemed calm, so different from the storm brewing inside her. Her mind was racing. Ethan had assured her they would leave, but where would they go? And who could they trust? The world felt so much bigger now, and for the first time, she realized how much of it she had been kept in the dark about. She wanted to ask him more questions, to demand answers about the people he was involved with, about how deep this went, but she was afraid. Afraid of what he might say, afraid of what she might learn. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Ethan's voice. Mia, he said, his tone softer than usual. She turned, seeing him standing in the doorway, fully dressed, his bag slung over his shoulder. He looked more like the man she had met weeks ago, calm, in control, but there was something in his eyes that betrayed the uncertainty she could feel in the air between them. "We need to go," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. Mia's heart began to race again. She nodded, taking a deep breath, and followed him to the door. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of everything still hung over her, but she knew she had no choice. There was no turning back now. As they walked out the door, Mia's eyes flickered to the street, the same street she had come to know over the past few days. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and it made her nervous. Ethan's steps were quick, purposeful, as he led her to his car. He didn't speak as he started the engine, and Mia didn't press him. They both knew that time was of the essence, and that meant silence was their only ally right now. The car sped down the streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional flick of a turn signal. Mia's mind was spinning. She had no idea where they were headed, but she had to trust that Ethan knew what he was doing. Her hand gripped the seat beneath her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself believe that she wasn't alone. Ethan was here, and he had promised to protect her. But as they drove deeper into the city, Mia couldn't help but wonder how far this would go. How much longer could they keep running before they would be found? She glanced at Ethan, his profile illuminated by the streetlights. There was so much about him she didn't know, so much he hadn't told her. And yet, here they were, speeding away from everything, together. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small, but desperate for some sense of security. Ethan didn't look at her, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We're going to a safe house," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's a place where no one can find us." Mia nodded, though the fear still gripped her heart. A safe house? The words didn't offer much comfort. She didn't know what kind of people Ethan had been involved with, but she knew that whatever it wasn't something she wanted to get caught up in. But for now, it was all she had. She had to trust him, even if it was hard. The city lights faded into the distance as they drove further away, and Mia closed her eyes, trying to push the fear from her mind. She had been running from her past for so long, but now she was running with Ethan, into an unknown future. The silence in the car was thick with unspoken words, and Mia's thoughts swirled around her like a storm. She didn't know what the next chapter of her life would look like, but she knew. This much, it wouldn't be easy. They were running now, but for how long? And when would the past finally catch up with them? Mia sat quietly in the car, her hands trembling slightly as the miles passed by. The road ahead was dark, but it wasn't just the night that felt heavy. It was the uncertainty that clung to the air. She didn't know where they were going, only that Ethan had promised they'd be safe, but the doubt that had been simmering inside her began to boil over. Ethan had been so open with her in the beginning, so kind, but now, with each passing minute, she felt like she was losing him to something darker. She had trusted him, and maybe she still did, but there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was wrong. They'd been driving for what felt like hours, and Mia could see the stress on Ethan's face, his jaw tight as his hands gripped the steering wheel. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. "Where are we going?" He didn't respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Mia could see him wrestle with his thoughts before he finally spoke. "I told you it's a safe house," he said, his tone clipped. "We'll be there soon." Mia nodded, but the uncertainty still churned inside her. They had driven through several unfamiliar neighborhoods, leaving the city behind, and now the landscape around them was becoming increasingly desolate. The city lights were just a faint glow in the distance, and all she could see now were empty fields and dark roads. "Is it really safe?" Mia asked, her voice breaking the silence. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It has to be," he said, his voice tight. "We don't have any other choice right now." Mia turned her gaze back to the dark road ahead, the trees lining the path now casting long, eerie shadows in the car's headlights. The fear she had been pushing down for so long was creeping up again, and this time, it was stronger. She didn't know if it was the situation or her own instincts, but she felt like they were being watched. Every turn they took felt like they were being led into a trap. The air felt thick with tension. Ethan seemed to sense her unease and reached over, placing a hand on hers for a brief moment. His touch was warm, comforting, but it didn't fully ease the anxiety that had settled in her chest. "I'm doing this for you, Mia," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. I just want to keep you safe. Please, trust me. Mia squeezed his hand, trying to force herself to trust him. She wanted to believe in his words, in the promise he had made to protect her. But the more she thought about everything, the more uncertain she became. What had Ethan really been involved in? Who were these people that seemed to control his every move? And most importantly, would she ever truly be free from the life she had left behind? The car slowed as they reached a long gravel driveway, flanked by tall, overgrown trees. In the distance, Mia could make out the silhouette of a house, small, dark, and isolated from everything else. Ethan turned the car down the driveway and parked in front of the house. He turned off the engine, the silence of the night settling in around them. We're here, he said, his voice steady, though Mia could hear the edge of worry beneath it. Mia took a deep breath and looked out the window. The house seemed so out of place, like a forgotten part of the world, cut off from everything else. The windows were dark, the lights inside dim, and there was an unsettling stillness that filled the air. It didn't feel like a safe house. It felt like a place where secrets were kept. Mia felt her heart race, her breath quickening as the weight of the situation settled in. Is this really safe, Ethan? She asked again, her voice trembling with the uncertainty that had taken hold of her. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped out of the car and walked to the trunk, retrieving a small bag. Mia stayed in the car, her eyes scanning the house as her mind raced. Ethan returned to her side and opened the door. It's fine, he said, his voice trying to reassure her, though it didn't fully mask the tension he was feeling. We'll stay here until we figure things out. I won't let anything happen to you, Mia. I promise. Mia hesitated, looking at the house one more time. The air felt thick with uncertainty, but there was nowhere else to go. She didn't know if this was the right choice, but she knew that staying in the car wasn't an option. She stepped out, and together, they made their way toward the front door. Ethan led the way, his hand brushing against hers as they walked, a silent reassurance that, for now, they were in this together. But as they reached the door, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something she might not be able to escape from. Mia and Ethan entered the small, isolated house, and as the door creaked shut behind them, an uneasy silence filled the air. The weight of the moment hung between them like an invisible cloud. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked into a trap, that the promises of safety were too good to be true. Ethan had been her protector for so long, but now the fear that had once kept her awake at night was starting to creep back in. She looked around the dimly lit room, her heart racing, but Ethan's presence beside her was a small comfort. Are we really safe here? Mia finally asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay calm. Ethan paused, his eyes scanning the room before he spoke. I think so, he said, though the hesitation in his voice didn't reassure her. It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do for now. Mia nodded but didn't feel reassured. It didn't matter where they were. As long as Ethan's past was still haunting them, nothing would feel safe. They sat in the living room, the faint sounds of the night creeping in from the outside. Ethan had told her that they needed to stay hidden for a while, that the people after him wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But Mia wasn't sure how much longer she could keep running. Her life had always been full of uncertainty, but now it felt like they were trapped, caught between the past and whatever darkness awaited them. As the hours passed, Mia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She looked over at Ethan, who was lost in his thoughts, his face a mask of concern. She knew he was doing his best to keep her safe, but she also knew that there were things he wasn't telling her, things that could change everything. Ethan, Mia spoke again, breaking the silence. What exactly are we running from? What did you do? Ethan's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he opened up. I didn't want you to be a part of this, he said quietly. But I got involved in a deal with the wrong people. They don't care who they hurt to get what they want. And now they want me to pay. Mia's heart sank as the pieces started to fall into place. The danger, the secrets, the lies. Are we ever going to be free of this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his face filled with regret and sadness. I don't know, he said softly. But I won't stop fighting for you, Mia. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, even if it means facing my past head on. Mia nodded slowly, trying to push down the knot in her throat. The uncertainty was overwhelming, but she knew she couldn't turn back. She had come this far, and she couldn't let fear control her any longer. The next morning, Ethan woke up early and began making plans. He told Mia they couldn't stay in the safe house any longer. He had made some arrangements, and it was time to move again. This time, they would leave everything behind and start fresh. It's not going to be easy, he said, as he packed their things. But we have a chance. A real chance to make a new life. Mia stood in the doorway, her heart beating faster with every word. She didn't know if she could do it. She didn't know if she could keep running. But she also knew she didn't want to go back to the life she had before. I'm ready, Mia said finally, her voice steady. Wherever we go, I'll go with you. Ethan smiled at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and love. You don't have to be afraid anymore, Mia. We'll make it through this together. As they drove away from the house, Mia felt a small spark of hope begin to grow inside her. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she believed in the possibility of something better. She didn't know what the future held, but she was no longer running from it. She was facing it head-on, with Ethan by her side. And that, for now, was enough. In this collection of touching stories, follow the journey of Mia, a young girl who escapes her cruel past and finds hope in the arms of a man she learns to trust. As their paths intertwine, they must face the darker side of life, filled with danger, secrets, and betrayal. Each moment in these touching stories is filled with raw emotion, as Mia and her protector navigate the uncertainties of a world that seems determined to tear them apart. Through the highs and lows, Mia begins to find her own strength, learning that safety and love can exist, even in the most unlikely places. These touching stories not only capture the essence of survival, but also reveal the profound impact that trust and love can have in overcoming fear. With each turn of the page, the emotional depth of Mia's journey resonates, as she faces challenges that will test her in ways she never imagined. These touching stories will stay with you, reminding you of the power of resilience and the hope that shines even in the darkest of times. The emotional twists and turns are bound to captivate you, leaving you with a lasting impression of the strength that lies within each of us, waiting to emerge when we need it most. Get ready for these touching stories that will inspire and move you, as they reveal the power of love, courage, and the will to survive.